Welcome, everyone. We really appreciate all of you taking an active role and an interest in this project. My name's Mark Geis. I'm the Deputy County Executive for Economic Development. I'm also the IDA Director and part of the Partnership for Economic Growth and a bunch of other stuff. But, thank you for coming. And this LWRP, maybe some of you in the room are aware that this has been going on for quite some time. And it's been start and stops. There's some of it maybe was, maybe we didn't push hard enough, but also there was things that changed at the Department of State level. And we're going to talk about that a little more. But, we wanted to get everyone together here today to talk about sort of what is an LWRP, why is it important, what are the various steps that in the process of getting an LWRP, why is it important, and all of those things. So I'm going to talk sort of high level for a little bit here, and then I'm going to pass it over to, I believe, Courtney, and she's going to talk about some more of the detail stuff. But so the Waterfront Revitalization of Coastal Areas and Inland Waterways Act created the opportunities for communities to participate in the LWRP process, and it's all voluntary. But these local LWRPs, they're really land use and water use plans that the communities developed. It looks at their natural, public, and working waterfronts. But it provides a comprehensive sort of, a mini comprehensive plan really for the waterfront. And it helps protect uses on that waterfront and also lines you up for funding later. There are 7 sections to an LWRP. One is the area boundary. One is which you see around the room here and in the handouts. There's an inventory and analysis. In other words, what do you currently have? What's there now? There are policies. I believe there are 42 policies, if I recall correctly. 42 policies. And then there are proposed land and water use projects. So projects that are identified within each one of these. Then there's techniques for local implementation, state and federal actions and programs, and then local commitment and consultation with other affected federal, state, regional, local agencies. So what are the benefits of an LWRP? First of all, local, state, and federal actions are required to be consistent in an LWRP, and it helps ensure that that the government levels are working together in unison, that they're all working sort of reading off the same sheet of music, so that they're consistent with not only what the policies are at the state level, but also what you're saying as a community you'd like to see happen there. It builds community consensus. Obviously, it's not something that anybody's forcing down anyone's throat. You're all part of the process. So, we're, really queuing up the boundaries, the projects, etc. And then we're all agreeing that this is what we want to do. It also lines us up for technical assistance through various agencies, but especially the Department of State. And then, and then also, I guess maybe most importantly, it lines us up for funding through various state agencies. They see that you have an LWRP that's been adopted, and it tells the state that you're serious, and that it checks a big old box that says yes, they have an approved LWRP. So what are some of the types of projects that are in a typical LWRP? Public access to the water, physical and visual access. The community having the ability to get to the water resources. And those include things like kayak launches, and you can see one here in North Tonawanda, waterfront trails, waterfront master planning. This is in Geneva. If you haven't been there, it's beautiful. Visitor and event centers, again in Geneva. Waterfront Revitalization, that's the Harbor Hotel in Clayton. That's owned by the Hart Hotels, that owns also the Celeron Hotel, and the southern end of Chautauqua Lake. Downtown revitalization plans. Opera House renovations. They're just examples of some of the projects that were funded through various state agencies that resulted from adopted LWRPs. Water quality projects, things like drainage and stream bank stabilization, shoring up roads, etc. Tourism and branding, I believe that was City of Jamestown, but I think Jamestown Renaissance Corporation was involved in that as well. So that's another example. And so I am supposed to turn it over to Courtney right now, and I will. But I did want to just have you show the next slide to sort of talk through this a little bit. When we really took a serious crack at this back in 2015, the Department of State was allowing us to have one LWRP that had all 10 communities. And that's what we did down on Chautauqua Lake, and we got that adopted at the time. So we got through the process to the point of a draft, and then we submitted to the Department of State. The Department of State was reviewing it, and it takes them some time to review it, and they finally came back and said, we're not going to allow that anymore. We need to do separate LWRPs. So it really threw a monkey wrench in what we were doing. However, having said that, there was a lot of good content there, and they were able to sort of pull out a lot of that content. And so we weren't starting this process from scratch. We had a really good jumping off point from that effort. But I stood in front of a bunch of municipal leaders, almost 10 years ago, and I said, I promise we will get this done. And we will. I'm saying to you, I promise we will get this done. And we will get this done. So with that, I think I'll kick it over to Courtney.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Okay, so as Mark had mentioned, we're kind of starting a phase 3 of this project. And where we are today is we have hired a consultant to help us with this project. We're working with Ingalls Planning, and they're also working with Prospect Hill and their summit. They couldn't make it tonight, but they will be at our next public meeting, so you'll get a chance to introduce yourself to them. We have a waterfront advisory committee, and we meet typically every month. So those meetings have been going really well. And then we have prepared a community outreach process plan, which helps us organize these public meetings. That was approved by the state, just one of the steps we have to do. So the main sections we've been working on so far are the waterfront revitalization area boundaries, which are all the maps around the room. And then the inventory and analysis, which is really what we're going to be covering tonight. And then at our next meeting, we'll talk a little bit more about some proposed land and water uses and proposed projects within those boundary areas. And then we'll probably touch on the policies as well, because as Mark mentioned, there's 42 of them for each LWRP. After that, the consultants will continue drafting each section, and then we will hold a third public information meeting where you'll be presented with a draft of each LWRP, and then that'll go to the state for a 60-day review. Okay. So the boundaries. So these boundaries were created through the past 2 phases, and there is also a coastal boundary as well, which is kind of what we based these boundaries off of. The coastal boundary is something that the state created, so we had to make sure that we matched those, but we could also exceed those boundaries as well if we thought the area should be bigger. So these areas include places that are affected by the waterfront, so different issues and opportunities that they might face, and they follow natural physical features, waterways, streets, and railroads. Some minor changes minor changes were made in phase 3, but they have been rewritten and resubmitted to DOS, so they're currently at the state for their approval. Okay, so the inventory and analysis. This is going to be the bulk of our presentation tonight. So in addition to developing those boundaries, the majority of the work that has been done so far is drafting this section of the LWRPs. So this just describes important resources, persistent or emerging problems, opportunities, and other issues within each community. So one of the things that they did is they looked at the local land use controls and local zoning, and they found some key findings. This is just pretty much an overview. The actual inventory is a lot more detailed, so we just highlight some key features here. But overall, most of the land uses are pretty consistent, and they can be permitted currently in the current zoning that most communities have. So things like marinas, launches, those things are permitted where they're appropriate. One thing they did find was that there are limited design considerations for the harbor / waterfront areas. So that might be something that could come up as potential projects, as creating these overlay districts for design considerations. Another thing that was noted for a issue or opportunity was in the town of Westfield. There's currently kind of like a campground of boats, which is really cool and really neat, but it's not currently permitted in the town. So that might be something that comes out of this, is changing the zoning for that. Some other things are including provisions for steep slopes, environmentally sensitive areas, distance to shoreline, while looking at site plan review. And then once again, the overlays are just kind of light on design consideration. Next, they looked at existing land use, and they found that some more attention needs to be focused on gateways and important corridors, such as Route 5. There's several main streets within the areas, like downtown areas, such as Sunset Bay. There's a Ripley, Hamlet, Barcelona, Village of Westfield, City of Dunkirk. They have some great downtown areas. And then some private water enhanced uses complement the beaches and waterfront, but they could, complement public spaces as well. There's some attention to streetscape needs, small area planning design standards and regulations. Ripley does have a Main Street plan, so incorporating that somewhere should be considered, as well as Barcelona Harbor Beach area. There's, I believe, a plan for that as well. And then, of course, we can always improve public park and trail connections. We also looked at some underutilized sites. So they did find several abandoned or underutilized structures or buildings, such as the ones listed there. The NRG site, the Oddfellows Hall in Ripley. There's some land owned by the Village of Westfield near Bell Creek, which would be a great opportunity to utilize, as well as 10 Clinton Street by the village. So just something to keep in mind is needing to coordinate with the stakeholders, property owners, to improve those structures. Next, they looked at some current water-dependent uses, and they found that, throughout these communities, there's a mix of beaches with and without lifeguards for swimming, and swimming is permitted at Sunset Bay and Wright Park. There's private fisheries, campgrounds, there's piers at Dunkirk Harbor, or Dunkirk, Westfield, and Hanover, and then, several boat launches throughout these communities as well. One of the things that got brought up was, there could be a need for more lifeguards or swimming in these areas, if that's something that's envisioned. I know for the town of Sheridan, they mentioned that there used to be lifeguards at their town park campground, and but they no longer have lifeguards there. But they were like, that would be great if we could get them back, but how do we do that? Some other opportunities is just including some other beaches as well. So water enhanced uses, these are really, we have some great scenic views in these areas. Along Route 5 is really great, really pretty. There's some rural venues popping up. Ripley is listed here as having a great, wedding venue. There's Hideaway Bay down in Silver Creek. Just some things that got brought up as, some issues are to clear and trim vegetation to improve those views along those areas. We might want to consider changing some permitting processes to encourage those rural event venues. And once again, look at design considerations. Okay, so then we talk about the harbor management areas. And there are 3 significant harbors within these communities. There's the City of Dunkirk, Town of Hanover, and the Town of Westfield. And then there also is a small harbor area in Silver Creek. So these areas will have a harbor management plan built into their LWRP. So this allows them to kind of regulate those areas a little more specifically. So they talked about, within these areas, we might want to include some dredging schedules. We want to look at flooding and erosion control, especially along Cattaraugus Creek and Silver Creek/Walnut Creek. And then, we could regulate some jet skis and boating in certain areas where it's an issue. And then, of course, improve break walls and, just make sure that we coordinate with those other entities that need to be involved, such as New York State Parks and the Army Corps. Next, they looked at public access areas with parks and recreation and trails. There's really some, great parks within these communities. There's some listed there. There's also, the Lake Erie State Park in Portland. There's access to the lake via harbors, piers, beaches, trails, all stuff that we know and love about our communities. We could definitely improve and expand pedestrian and ADA access, in some of these areas, especially along like the beachfront. And then of course, we always want to, try to add and expand our trail network within our county. And they also looked at some historic resources. We have really 2, beautiful lighthouses within these communities. There's Barcelona and then there's Dunkirk. Some of these areas could use some improvements. Barcelona Lighthouse, which they are currently, I believe, working on. Easton Hall and then also McClurg Museum were also brought up as some places that could use some renovations. And once again, we just really want to make sure that we collaborate with the other stakeholders involved within these areas, especially, the state and federal agencies. They also looked at tourism efforts within the county. And, obviously we're located within the Grape Belt, so there's lots of vineyard acres within this region. There's some beach clubs. We got Sunset Bay with Cabana Sands. The downtown areas are really great. And then, of course, we just want to continue to emphasize those connections to the downtown areas, to the beachfront. And then expanding programming and events could be an opportunity. Having more regattas and festivals should really be encouraged if that's something, the community wants to see. Flooding and erosion. So, this one, they really emphasized that the town of Hanover and the village of Silver Creek experienced the most intense flooding and erosion. And then, there's also some ongoing flooding and erosion in the city of Dunkirk that's being addressed in several ways, but I'm sure every community, kind of has their own issues with this, but it's something that they really are taking a close look at, and especially when they start talking about projects. So this will be a key element in that section. But just some things to be, considerate of, it's climate change, it's only going to increase the problems that we're currently seeing, especially, in the areas that are currently having all these issues. So we just want to make sure that planning boards, have the adequate tools and training to evaluate the impacts of development within these areas. And then, just once again stress that these codes, these zoning codes, ordinances should really, address flooding and erosion. They also looked at the water supply and wastewater and stormwater management within these communities. At the time we put this together, 5 out of the 10 communities are members of the North Chautauqua Water District. You know, the flooding issues have triggered the need to address drainage throughout, you know, the most prone areas to flooding. And then these areas really were focused at the stream mouths and at, you know, Lake Erie, of course. And then they also mentioned that they took a look at the annual drinking water quality reports for these communities to show, you know, that the system meets the attainment goals, but the source, which is Lake Erie, you know, contains a large amount of organic compounds. So one of the things they noted was that the town of Sheridan, the town of Dunkirk, and the town and village of Westfield, their codes are really comprehensive and, you know, address stormwater management. So these could be, you know, ones that other communities really look at to see what they're doing and how they can implement some more things within their own codes that would address that in a more, you know, efficient manner. They also looked at some runoff within the areas and how that can impact water quality, you know, throughout these drinking areas. And, you know, they report that the corrosion of household plumbing systems really does impact water quality. So that's something to be considerate of when we think about, you know, potential projects as well. Next, they looked at transportation. Once again, Route 5 was mentioned. You know, it's a major highway within these communities. Currently, there are no railroad stops on the Amtrak line that parallels Route 5. You know, Westfield has expressed some interest in an Amtrak stop, and Westfield and Dunkirk have expressed interest, you know, in some excursion and commuter rail service as well. And there are some persistent complaints as well about trains being stalled along the Norfolk Southern tracks that can prevent, you know, access to the residents on the other side. So once again, you know, just some opportunities here. Route 5, you know, it's part of the Great Lakes Seaway Trail. So looking at enhancing that could really be beneficial to our communities. And then also just looking at, you know, some no wake and harbor zone speed limits. That could also really help, you know, safety within these areas, especially those harbor management communities. They also decided to look at some energy within these communities, some energy infrastructure. Offshore wind is obviously a very hot topic right now. And I believe this has actually been updated. I believe there are some more communities that have, you know, gone on record to be against offshore wind. So that was something they wanted to really emphasize within this plan. And then Ripley has expressed some interest in alternative energy for their town facilities. And Dunkirk, you know, has some solar projects as well. But obviously there's more solar throughout these communities, but they're just not all, you know, listed on here. And then they also just mentioned the energy plant again. You know, it really is a great opportunity to possibly do something there as well, which is being investigated, I'm sure. They also looked at some fish and wildlife habitats. There are several endangered plant and animal communities within these boundary areas. While there are a few DOS significant coastal habitats within the boundary areas, there are significant areas of habitat and numbers of species in them. And then, of course, you know, we have a great asset here with, you know, fisheries, fish spawning areas, bird stopovers, and nesting areas that really attract anglers and bird watchers, you know, throughout the region. So just some opportunities, you know, we could really focus on protecting and enhancing, you know, the fisheries and bird watching areas within our communities and make sure that we protect these natural communities, you know, when we're considering bulkheading, shoreline, and stream modifications, just being conscious of that. Next, they looked at surface and groundwater resources, and they found that Lake Erie's best use is for drinking water, fishing, swimming, and other recreation. The best uses for streams and tributaries of Lake Erie are mostly for swimming and other recreation and fishing. It was noted that Ripley and Westfield do have streams, which is great for drinking water in those areas. Let's see. So many of the Lake Erie tributaries are also known to be impaired or to have minor impacts. Upper Chautauqua Creek and its tributaries in the town of Westfield and Upper Belson Creek Gage Gulf and its tributaries are classified as threatened, so that's something we just want to make note of. And just making sure that we protect, and enhance water quality, just being mindful of that. They also looked at topography. The boundary areas are all within the Lake Erie Plain, which extends from Lake Erie to the escarpment. In general, this plain varies in slope from 1 to 2% and ranges in width from 2 to 6 miles. They did look at some, opportunities for in-depth analysis that could be used for proposed development on steep slopes to ensure, public safety and structural integrity for development and the sustainability of the shoreline. It also was noted that, if soils were drained within the boundary areas, we would have, many acres of prime farmland for agriculture. They also looked at air and water quality and issues related to that. Air quality in Chautauqua County is measured in Jamestown, and it is listed as being marginal, which is the lowest value. So the values run from marginal to extreme. In comparison, no New York counties are listed as extreme, although counties in and around New York City are listed as severe. A more, close comparison is Lake Erie's Erie County. Erie County's air quality was measured, and that was listed as moderate. So we have some good air quality here. They also, looked at the Fredonia Reservoir and then, how that's currently compromised. Just some other things to note. Once again, they talk about, the Fredonia Reservoir and, how to handle that. And then they also talked about the Minton Reservoir and how that is supplemented by draws directly from Chautauqua Creek when the reservoir's level is low and during periods of high use. Okay. So we're going to talk some more about what our next steps are. Our next meeting we're hoping to have scheduled for November 14th, once again from 5 to 6:30-ish. And here we'll be talking about projects, land uses, and water uses. So this will be, a great opportunity to really see what you want to, have within your own community. We do have a project website where we have updates on draft materials, summaries, and upcoming events. This is what our website looks like. We really encourage you to go and check it out. At a future date, we will have some online engagement too, where you have an opportunity to fill out a survey regarding the project portion of this project. But for the rest of the meeting, we really want you to try and think about, any key waterfront issues that you've noticed that, really weren't discussed tonight, along with any opportunities. So we did have comment cards, which if you didn't get one, they are in the back over there with the rest of the meeting materials. So we just encourage you to fill those out, walk around, look at the maps, come up to us if you have any questions. We really just want to kind of keep it informal and just hear what you have to say about, these communities. Yeah, once again, our next meeting we're hoping for November 14th. The location is to be determined. We'll send that out soon. We have an idea in mind, but we want to make sure that's available first. Yeah, thank you so much for attending, and I know that was a lot of heavy information, but please stick around and talk to us and walk around. Thank you.